7 years before the world was changed forever by 9/11, something happened that was, well, a chilling blueprint for those very attacks. We're going to talk about Air France Flight 8969. It's an absolutely incredible story that most people have forgotten, but believe me, its lessons are more important today than you could possibly imagine.
Just try to imagine hearing those words. From the very start, the hijackers made it brutally, terrifyingly clear what they were all about. For the 173 people on that plane, passengers and crew, this wasn't just a hijacking. This single sentence kicked off an absolute life-or-death nightmare.
Okay, so let's set the scene. It's Christmas Eve, 1994. We're at the airport in Algiers, Algeria. Now, you gotta remember, Algeria at this time is in the middle of a really violent civil war, so things are already tense. An Air France Airbus A320 is all set to fly back to Paris. Passengers are getting settled, and then 4 armed guys in uniform get on board. They say they're presidential police, just doing one last security check.
And then, bam! The takeover was incredibly fast and terrifying. Those men, they weren't police at all. They were mujahideen from a violent group called the Armed Islamic Group, or GIA. They immediately demand to fly to Paris, saying they're going to hold a press conference. A press conference, yeah, right? But the Algerian authorities, they weren't having it. They drew a hard line, blockaded the plane right there on the tarmac with vehicles, and refused to let it go anywhere. Just like that, a deadly standoff was on.
So for the next 39 hours, think about that, almost 2 full days, that plane just sat there on the hot tarmac. It was a total pressure cooker of fear and tension. You had this brutal test of wills, right? The absolutely determined terrorists on the plane versus the completely unyielding Algerian military on the ground. And caught right in the middle, every single person on that flight.
So here's the bottom line. It was a complete and total deadlock. The hijackers are demanding to leave, and they're threatening to start killing people. The Algerian government, on the other hand, is absolutely determined not to negotiate with terrorists, so they refuse to budge, not on a single thing. Neither side was backing down an inch, and you can just feel the clock ticking.
And then they made good on their threat. To prove they were deadly serious, the hijackers made their first move. See, during that fake security check, they'd identified an Algerian police officer among the passengers. They dragged him to the front of the plane, right to the door, and executed him. They told the authorities on the ground his body was a message for them. Absolutely brutal.
Well, the hours just crawled by, and the Algerians still refused to give in. So the terror ramped up. The hijackers picked another passenger, this time a Vietnamese diplomat. And just like before, he was murdered, and his body was pushed out of the plane. You can only imagine the horror for the people still inside, the whispers spreading through the cabin. It's not one now, it's 2.
But the third victim, well, this is where the whole game changed. He was a young chef who worked at the French embassy in Algiers. The murder of a French citizen wasn't just another tragedy, it was a direct challenge to the French government, which had been frantically trying to negotiate from a distance. This was it. This was the last straw.
So French Prime Minister Edouard Balladur gets on the phone with the Algerian Prime Minister, and he doesn't mess around. He lays down an ultimatum. He makes it crystal clear that from this point on, France would hold the Algerian government personally responsible for any more deaths. And guess what? The threat worked. After 39 excruciating hours, the Algerians finally caved. They let the plane leave.
You can only imagine the wave of relief that must have washed over the passengers as they finally took off. They were free. But there was a problem. A big one. After running the plane's power on the ground for nearly 2 days, they were dangerously low on fuel. No way they could make it all the way to Paris. The closest they could get was Marseille, on the southern coast of France. And this, folks, is where the story takes a truly sinister twist.
I mean, think about it. The hijackers were obsessed with getting to Paris for this press conference. But was that really it? Why were they so insistent, and why would they need so much fuel for that? Well, as that plane was flying towards France, intelligence agencies were working like crazy behind the scenes. And what they found was a motive so much more horrifying than anyone could have possibly imagined.
The whole press conference thing, it was a complete lie, a cover story. French intelligence confirmed the terrorists' real plan. They were going to use that fully fueled jetliner as a weapon, not for talking, but for mass destruction. The sheer scale of this plot was just staggering. The hijackers had demanded the plane be filled with 27 tons of jet fuel once they landed in Marseille. Now, to put that in perspective, they only needed about 9 tons to get to Paris. Their plan was to turn that Airbus A320 into a massive flying firebomb and plow it straight into the Eiffel Tower. This wasn't a hostage situation anymore. It had become a desperate race to stop a catastrophic terrorist attack.
So as Flight 8969 made its approach to Marseille, the crew and the passengers on board had absolutely no idea they were flying straight into a trap, because waiting for them on the ground was France's elite counterterrorism unit, the GIGN. The final showdown was about to kick off.
All right, here's the GIGN's game plan, and it was pretty clever. First, they guided the plane to a remote corner of the airport. Then they started to stall for time, trying to wear the hijackers out with endless negotiations. They even dangled the promise of that press conference right there on the plane, hoping to use that as a distraction to get their assault teams into position under the cover of night.
But then, just as the GIGN was getting ready to make their move, the whole plan just fell apart. The head hijacker got suspicious about all the delays. In a super tense moment, he started screaming at the pilot, "Move the plane, move it over there!" And he forced them to taxi the plane right up next to the main terminal building, completely out in the open. The GIGN's carefully laid plan? Totally useless. They had to scrap everything and scramble to prepare for an immediate assault in a much, much more dangerous spot.
The breaking point, the trigger, came when the hijackers just opened fire on the control tower, knowing the negotiators were in there. That was the green light. Immediately, 3 of those mobile passenger staircases floored it across the tarmac towards the plane. The GIGN stormed the aircraft, and for the next 20 minutes, that cabin was an absolute war zone, just non-stop gunfire and explosions.
And when the smoke cleared, the outcome was, well, it was astonishing. All 4 hijackers were dead. And here's the truly miraculous part. Despite hundreds of bullets flying inside that confined space, all 173 remaining passengers and crew were rescued. Now, 9 GIGN commandos were wounded in the firefight, but make no mistake, the operation was a massive success. They had stopped a catastrophe.
So, the world celebrated this incredible, daring rescue. And then, for the most part, everybody just kind of moved on. But here's the thing. What happened on Christmas of 1994 wasn't just some isolated incident. It was a dress rehearsal, a forgotten blueprint for a much bigger tragedy that was still to come.
I mean, just look at the parallels to what happened 7 years later. They are absolutely undeniable, and honestly, they're chilling. In both cases, a hijacked passenger jet, loaded with fuel, meant to be used as a missile. The target? A symbolic national landmark. The GIA's plan in 1994 was, for all intents and purposes, identical to the Al-Qaeda plot in 2001. The only, and I mean only difference was the outcome.
Can you even begin to fathom what it must have been like for the survivors of Flight 8969 to watch the news on September 11, 2001? It had to be this uniquely horrifying experience. One survivor later said they just sat in front of the TV for 24 hours straight, couldn't even move, as that awful realization dawned on them. That was what was supposed to happen to us. That was the fate they had so narrowly escaped.
And that really brings us to the final and most important point. The story of Air France Flight 8969, it's so much more than just a dramatic rescue mission. It's this stark reminder that threats are constantly evolving, and that things like good intelligence, countries working together, and just the sheer bravery of the people on the front lines are absolutely critical. And it really forces us to ask a tough question. What other blueprints, what other warnings might we be overlooking right now?